Katana, the soul of the samurai, is an inseparable part of the history of the samurai. Within the array of swords used as primary weapons by the samurai, there are actually two major types: the Uchigatana and the Tachi, or long sword. Broadly speaking, what you might imagine as a sword a samurai wears at his waist is called an Uchigatana. On the other hand, a sword with a longer blade and generally larger construction is characteristic of the Tachi. In this episode, we will delve into the advent of the Tachi in Japanese history, its evolution, and the detailed differences between the Uchigatana and Tachi. The history of swords in Japan is ancient, dating back to before the Common Era, when straight swords, introduced from China, were already in use. For a while, straight swords were prevalent, but during the Heian period, as samurai, who primarily engaged in mounted combat, began to rise in prominence, there was a demand for swords that were easier to draw on horseback and allowed for fluid defense. This led to the creation of the Tachi, a sword with a curvature. While the straight swords used previously were mainly for stabbing, the curvature at the base of the blade enhanced the sharpness of slashes. The curve of the blade offered various advantages in actual combat, such as easily drawing the blade from the scabbard, smoothing the action of cutting and pulling for severance, and absorbing the impact when striking. Additionally, compared to the traditional straight swords, the blade length increased significantly to about 30 to 31 inches, which was sufficient for a mounted warrior to slash and cut down an opponent from horseback. This marked the beginning of the Tachi, and by extension, the Katana. Although the Tachi, with its longer blade, is often seen as a separate entity from the standard sword, the Uchigatana that is commonly known today as the Katana actually came later. The original Katana was the Tachi. The Kamakura period marked a significant evolution for the Tachi. During this era, power shifted from the emperor to the warrior class, and the nation was embroiled in extensive conflicts. This led to the mass production and evolution of the katana. Currently, over 100 katanas are designated as national treasures, with 80% of them dating back to the Kamakura period, and 70% of those being Tachi. As conflicts increased, the Tachi evolved from the elegant design characteristic of the Heian period to a more robust and grandiose form that matched the spirit of the warriors at the time. Specifically, the blades became wider and thicker, and the tips took on a shorter, more compact shape. To cut through heavy armor, the swords increased in weight and size. Thus, the battles between warriors brought about the first major evolution of the Tachi. Further evolution of the Tachi occurred in the mid-Kamakura period, triggered by the Mongolian invasions of Japan, known as the Genko. This revealed three significant flaws in the Tachi. First, the thickness of the blade made it heavy and difficult to wield. Second, traditional Tachi were prone to chipping and breaking after repeated clashes. Third, the short tip made it impossible to repair blade damage, rendering the Tachi useless. At the time, Japan primarily engaged in one-on-one mounted combat, for which the traditional Tachi shape was effective. However, it proved inadequate against the Mongol army's infantry tactics, exposing several weaknesses. To address these flaws and prepare for future foreign invasions, Japan was compelled to reform its swordsmithing techniques. The renowned swordsmith Masamune then perfected a new style of tachi. This new tachi combined soft and hard steel to enhance strength, narrowed the blade to reduce weight, and extended the tip, allowing for repairs if chipped and making it better suited for thrusting, similar to Western swords. Thus, during the Kamakura period, the tachi evolved significantly and was perfected as a peerless sword. Subsequently, the tachi continued to be used throughout the era of mounted combat during the Nambokucho period. As warfare shifted to infantry combat, the leading role among swords transitioned to the shorter and more manageable Uchigatana. By the Sengoku period, with the rise of the Uchigatana, the tachi was seldom used in battle, becoming more a symbol of authority among high-ranking warriors. Thus, the tachi evolved its role over time. So what are the clear differences between the Uchigatana, the Japanese sword we are familiar with, and the tachi? The first noticeable difference is their length. There is a relative difference in length between the tachi and the Uchigatana. Traditionally, tachi were made longer than Uchigatana, which were somewhat shorter. The Uchigatana was originally developed for easier handling compared to the tachi, so the difference in length is to be expected. However, by modern classification standards, both tachi and swords with blade lengths of about 24 inches or more are included, making length alone an unclear differentiator. This is also influenced by the fact that many existing Japanese swords have been shortened over time through successive generations for easier handling. Another difference is in the curvature of the blade. The tachi is characterized by a deep curve regardless of blade length, typically with the center of the curve closer to the hilt. On the other hand, the Uchigatana features a shallower curve compared to the tachi. This was to allow for quicker drawing of the blade from the scabbard during foot battles. The most significant difference between the tachi and the Uchigatana is how they are worn. The tachi is suspended from the waist using a cord made of leather or similar material. In contrast, the Uchigatana is worn by inserting the scabbard into the belt at the waist. The image of a samurai that people today commonly imagine involves the sword being worn at the waist. Thus, such a samurai would be carrying an Uchigatana. Moreover, as the tachi is suspended from the waist, the blade always faces downward while being worn. On the other hand, the Uchigatana was worn with the blade facing up, inserted into the waistband. This difference arises from the distinct ways each sword is drawn. Following this, swords are displayed in museums and art galleries with the blade facing down. Incidentally, samurai wore both tachi and Uchigatana on the left side because the right hand was used to draw the sword. Samurai were typically right-handed by convention, and those born left-handed were often retrained to use their right hand. Interestingly, there are several types of tachi beyond the common variety. First is the kodachi, which refers to tachi with a blade length of less than 23.6 inches. Due to its size, it's often mistaken for a wakizashi, the samurai's secondary sword. It's said that kodachi were not used in actual combat, but rather served mostly for ceremonial purposes. A renowned user of the kodachi was Toda Seigen, a swordsman from the Sengoku period known as a blind sword master. In a tournament held in what is now Gifu Prefecture, despite his blindness, he famously defeated an opponent armed with a wooden sword, using a short split stick in just 3 moves. The Ootachi refers to a large tachi with a blade length exceeding 35.4 inches. While primarily dedicated to shrines, it is also said to have been used on battlefields as a weapon for mounted warriors. To lighten their weight, many Ootachi had thinner cross-sections and grooves carved into the blade. Ownership of Ootachi was limited to those of high status, and when used on the battlefield, a retainer would carry the Ootachi. The method of drawing an Ootachi involved either having a retainer hold the scabbard while the owner drew the sword, or the retainer drawing the sword from the scabbard to hand it over. And then there's the Kenuki Gata Tachi, a sword considered a precursor to the Tachi, used by military officials during the Heian period. It's a unique type among Japanese swords, not following the common construction of fitting the blade into a wooden handle. Instead, both the blade and the handle are made of iron, forming a single integrated structure. The blade has an extreme waist curve, bending only at the base. Despite being an early creation, these swords often feature elaborate decorations, resulting in a visually striking appearance. Used in battle as well as for ceremonial purposes, this sword, as a forerunner of the Tachi, became the everyday sword for courtiers by the 17th century during the Edo period. Let's now introduce one particularly famous Tachi. O Kanihira is a Tachi that is believed to have been crafted during the Heian period and is known as one of the greatest masterpieces among Japanese swords. The swordsmith Kanihira, who forged this sword, was a leading figure of his time. This sword is often referred to as a miraculous creation by Kanihira, a unique piece that he himself could not replicate. The reason lies in the balance of its shape and weight. The blade of this sword measures about 35.1 inches in length, which is quite long for a tachi. Normally, a sword of this length and size would weigh over 4.4 pounds. But O Kanihira weighs only about 2.98 pounds, making it exceptionally lightweight. This is due to its thinner construction compared to other swords of the same length, demonstrating the high level of craftsmanship involved. Furthermore, its center of gravity, including the curvature, is exquisitely balanced, making it easy to swing without feeling its weight. The beauty of its base iron and the pattern of the blade are also remarkable features of this sword. Attempts were made to replicate this sword in the early 20th century, but it proved impossible to recreate a sword of this size with both its strength and lightness. Despite being created during the nascent period of Japanese swords, it is an astonishing sword that is called the greatest of all time through to the present day. The known owner of this sword was Ikeda Terumasa, a warlord who served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the unifier of Japan. Known for his integrity, he valued his retainers above costly treasures, rarely coveting gold or silver. However, this sword was an exception. He reportedly paid a significant sum to acquire it, describing it as irreplaceable by an entire country. The Ikeda family traditionally displayed O Kanehira with armor every new year, passing it down as a treasured family sword. Even when the emperor expressed a desire to see it, the Ikeda family is said to have responded that he would need to visit Okayama to view it, treating O Kanehira as an invaluable treasure not to be taken out of their domain. Designated a national treasure in 1951, the sword was purchased by the Ministry of Education in 1967 for 65 million yen from the Ikeda family. When adjusted for inflation, this amount equals about 270 million yen today, marking the highest price in the sale and purchase of Japanese swords until recent times. The Tokyo National Museum now owns it, occasionally displaying it to the public every few years. When we look back on the history of Japan, a variety of weapons come to mind. Among them, during the Kamakura era, swords of incredible length emerged. These were called the Ootachi, or large tachi. Some of these still exist today, enshrined in Japanese shrines. At a glance, you might think they were merely decorative or used in ceremonies. However, while some were dedicated to shrines, they were also actively used in battles during the Warring States period. The Ootachi, as the name implies, is a large sword. Its blade length is about 35.4 inches or more. There are records of some reaching even 10 feet in length. The typical blade length of the Uchigatana that samurai commonly used was about 27 inches, making the Ootachi immense in comparison to the average height of the Japanese people of the time, and they weighed between 5.5 to 17.5 pounds. They weren't primarily weapons for infantry. They were designed for cavalry combat, harnessing the momentum of a galloping horse to strike down infantry or engage enemy riders. Some highly skilled warriors, confident in their strength, also used them in hand-to-hand combat, capitalizing on their reach to attack mounted enemies. At times, these swords, even surpassing the height of the wielder, dominated the battlefield. The emergence of the Ootachi in Japan can be traced back to the late Kamakura period. This was sparked by the invasions from the Mongol Empire, events known as the Genko invasions. In 1274 and again in 1281, the Mongols attempted to invade Japan. They brought with them an astounding force of 30,000 men in the first attempt and 100,000 in the second. Although Japan managed to repel these invasions, the shortcomings of their battle tactics were highlighted. Traditionally, Japanese battles were characterized by individual mounted combat or one-on-one cavalry duels. However, such tactics proved ineffective against the Mongol army who employed group warfare. This form of combat had foot soldiers surrounding and combating individual cavalry with spears. Japan found it challenging to counter this approach. Post-Genko, the strategy shifted from individual horseback combat to group warfare that emphasized mobility and the deployment of more foot soldiers. Accordingly, weapons transitioned from bows and arrows to close combat using Naginata and Tachi. Even soldiers with limited training could now engage in combat using the spear, making it a preferred weapon for the lower-ranking infantry. The swords used by higher-ranking samurai evolved too, becoming longer to engage multiple adversaries in group combat scenarios. As a result, the Ootachi, a sword exceeding 35.4 inches in blade length, made its debut. It's believed that the Ootachi was influenced by the large Seiryuto, or blue dragon sword, used by the Mongol forces to mow down infantry. So you might be wondering, how did the samurai handle such a massive sword? The privilege of owning an Ootachi was reserved for high-ranking samurai. Because the Ootachi was challenging to handle by one person, in actuality, these samurai had their attendants carry it for them on the battlefield. When it came time to use the sword, the attendant either drew it from its scabbard for the samurai, or the samurai would draw it themselves with the attendant holding the sheath. In instances where the samurai drew the blade themselves, they might discard the sheath right there on the battlefield. While there are tales of styles where the samurai would wear the Ootachi on their waist and draw it themselves, it's said that such techniques required a great deal of expertise. Hearing this, you might question its practicality in battle. But there were reasons beyond utility for the samurai to wield this weapon on the battlefield. One such reason was to display their status and power. By having attendants carry their sword, they could showcase their high social rank. The sheer weight and size of the Ootachi made it a challenge to wield, so being able to handle such a sword became a status symbol in itself. Moreover, its length made intricate and swift movements challenging, and one had to be cautious when using it to avoid harming their allies. Therefore, to effectively use the Ootachi, both physical strength and mastery in swordsmanship were essential. The Ootachi experienced a rapid surge in popularity, but as conflicts began to wane, and the Muromachi shogunate established a more stable political environment, their production started to decline. One reason for the Ootachi's short-lived popularity is believed to be the increasing use of the Naginata and spears by infantry to counter the attacks from mounted samurai. This shift made combat on horseback less advantageous. Consequently, Uchigatana, with a blade length of around 24 inches in length, began to be mass-produced. However, it's not as if the Ootachi completely disappeared from history. They made a comeback after the ignition of conflict in the Warring States period by the Onin War. Records show that the Asakura clan formed a battalion known as the Rikishitai, consisting of enormous, towering warriors, and equipped them with the Ootachi. Among the Asakura vassals were the brothers Magara Naotaka and Magara Naosumi. Both wielded massive Ootachi, roughly 63 inches in length, and were prominent in the Battle of Onegawa in 1570. Though they were eventually slain, their legendary swords, known as Taro Tachi and Jiro Tachi, are still remembered today. These blades are on display at the Atsuta Shrine Treasure Museum. The Atsuta Shrine is also renowned for enshrining the divine sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Nevertheless, the number of individuals capable of wielding the Ootachi was limited, preventing it from becoming a mainstream weapon. However, due to its immense power and show of force, some warriors during the Muromachi to late Warring States period favored its use, and certain feudal lords even formed squads dedicated to the Ootachi. Currently, Japan has several great swords that are considered masterpieces known as Ootachi. One of these is called the Nene Kirimaru, believed to have been used to vanquish monsters. This sword is housed at the Nikko Futarasan Shrine in Nikko City, Tochigi Prefecture. The total length of this sword is 127.6 inches, with a blade length of 85.3 inches, and it weighs an astounding 53 pounds, making it one of the largest Ootachi in Japan. Due to these characteristics, it's believed to have been forged as an offering. The origin of the name Nene Kirimaru stems from a legend. According to folklore, this very sword autonomously unsheathed itself and struck down a monster called Nene that dwelled in the Nenegazawa within the Nikko mountain. The true nature of this Nene is debated. Some theories suggest it's the renowned Japanese monster Kappa, while others posit it's a representation of a natural disaster personified as a monster. This Ootachi is believed to have been forged during the Nambokucho period, but its maker remains a mystery. There's a theory that it might have been crafted by Sanjo Munechika, the renowned smith behind one of the Tenkagoken, 5 swords under heaven, the Mikazuki Munechika. As per tradition, this sword is displayed atop the skin of a deer caught in the mountains during an annual festival held in April at the shrine, a tradition that's been ongoing for over 1,200 years. The Haja no Ontachi, crafted during the Edo period, is recognized as the largest sword in Japan. In the late Edo period, particularly in Shiomatsu City, Yamaguchi Prefecture, where the Hanaoka Hachimangu Shrine is located, the philosophy of Sonno Joi was prevalent, especially among the samurai and local residents. Sonno Joi emphasized revering the emperor as the center of governance and was also an insular ideology, advocating for the expulsion of foreigners from Japan. Around this time, Japan faced the significant event known as the arrival of the Black Ships, led by the American naval officer Matthew Perry. This heightened a sense of vulnerability in Japan against potential foreign invasions, further fueling the spread of this philosophy, which was in stark contrast to the views of the Edo shogunate, who held political power and were moving toward opening the country. In 1859, to commemorate the 1150th anniversary of the Hanaoka Hachimangu Shrine, a grand festival was planned. Coinciding with this event, a sword was commissioned to be forged with the intention to dispel malevolence and build a peaceful society. This sword, made to represent Haja Kensho, overcoming evil and showcasing the righteous path, measures an astounding 136 inches in blade length, approximately 183 inches in total length, and weighs around 165 pounds. To this day, it is heralded as the largest sword in Japan. This magnificent blade remains enshrined at the aforementioned shrine and is unveiled to the public only once a year, during a festival held in November.
The katana or Uchigatana refers to the type of Japanese sword most commonly envisioned. There are several types of swords, and the Uchigatana is one of them, also being the most well-known. Emerging around the 20th or 13th century, the Uchigatana played a significant role during the era of the samurai and became symbolic enough to be considered a trademark of the samurai. Let's take a look at the features of the Uchigatana. The blade length of an Uchigatana is typically over 23.6 inches, and it is characterized by a relatively shallow curvature. Before the Uchigatana became widespread, the Tachi was commonly used, compared to the Tachi, which generally has a longer blade and deeper curvature. The Uchigatana is overall smaller in construction. Next, let's discuss the method of carrying it. The Uchigatana was carried with the blade facing upwards, simply slipped into the belt of a samurai's hakama. This method is different from that of the Tachi. The Tachi was worn with the blade facing downwards, suspended from a belt with a special mount. This difference in carrying methods made it possible for the samurai to draw the Uchigatana quickly from its scabbard and strike swiftly. Both the Tachi and the Uchigatana are worn on the left side, as the samurai would draw the sword with their right hand. At that time, it was customary for the samurai to be right-handed. The emergence of the Uchigatana dates back to the 14th and 15th century. During this period, Japanese battle tactics transitioned from cavalry-centered combat using bows to mass infantry warfare. This shift in combat style brought significant changes to the weapons used on the battlefield. First, the Naginata, which was cumbersome in group combat, gradually fell out of use, and the spear became more prevalent. Additionally, the introduction of matchlock guns from abroad led to infantry units handling these firearms en masse. The large Tachi, previously used, with blade length of around 35.8 inches, became less favored due to their cumbersome nature and difficulty in drawing. This paved the way for the Uchigatana. By the 16th century, the Uchigatana with blade length of approximately 28.6 to 29.8 inches became the standard. Meanwhile, some Tachi that were no longer used on the battlefield were shortened and transformed into Uchigatana. Although Uchigatana appeared in history, it didn't evolve directly from the Tachi. The prototype of the Uchigatana is said to be a type of dagger called Sasuga, which originated in the early 20th century. The Sasuga was a short sword carried by lower-ranked foot soldiers who accompanied higher-ranked cavalry warriors, equipped alongside the Naginata as an auxiliary infantry weapon. This evolved, and by the 14th century, it transformed into the Uchigatana. Once fully established on the battlefield, the Uchigatana came to be possessed by everyone from high-ranking samurai to low-ranking foot soldiers. In the 16th century, during the Azuchi Momoyama period, it became customary among the samurai to wear both a long and a short Uchigatana. The shorter version is known as the Wakizashi. Simultaneously, the scabbards and other fittings for these swords were made in the same design for both blades. This trend led to the official samurai attire under the shogunate consisting of carrying both an Uchigatana and a Wakizashi, and the standard length of the Uchigatana was set at approximately 27.6 inches. The modern image of the samurai was finalized in this period. A Uchigatana, a symbolic weapon of the samurai, played a unique role on the battlefield. Although it became the mainstream among Japanese swords, it was actually a secondary weapon in battles. The primary weapon in Japanese warfare were long-range weapons like bows and stones, and mid-range weapons like Naginata and spears. Before the emergence of the Uchigatana, the bow was considered the symbol of the samurai, and those proficient in archery were highly respected. So when was the Uchigatana used? Initially, battles involved fighting with long-range weapons such as bows, guns, and stones. As combatants closed in each other, longer porous weapons like spears were employed. The Uchigatana was used when these primary weapons were lost or unsuitable, especially in close combat. Thus, while not the most frequently used weapon on the battlefield, it was often the final decisive weapon in conflicts. The Uchigatana took center stage during the tumultuous end of the 19th century, the end of the Tokugawa shogunate. Although large-scale battles were rare, there was widespread conflict between pro- and anti-shogunate forces across Japan. During this time, swordsmanship with the Uchigatana flourished, and sword masters emerged nationwide. Honing their skills, groups like the Shinsengumi, tasked with maintaining public order, often engaged in close-quarters combat in urban settings, typically involving small groups. Under these conditions, the Uchigatana proved to be an optimal weapon. I will introduce a renowned Uchigatana. The Yoshimoto Samonji is a Uchigatana crafted by the master swordsmith Samonji, and is famously known as the beloved sword of the warlord Imagawa Yoshimoto. This sword has a total length of 32.9 inches and a blade length of 26.3 inches. It was originally a Tachi that was shortened and remade into an Uchigatana. The name of this sword derives from its owner, Imagawa Yoshimoto. He is best known in Japanese history for the Battle of Okehazama. Ruling over the current Aichi and Shizuoka prefectures, Imagawa Yoshimoto commanded one of the foremost powers in Japan at that time. In this battle, despite his forces numbering 25,000 compared to Oda Nobunaga's 3,000, a disparity of 22,000, Yoshimoto was defeated by Nobunaga, catapulting Nobunaga to national fame. At this battle, Yoshimoto was carrying the Yoshimoto Samonji when he was slain. Subsequently, Oda Nobunaga seized this sword and made it his own cherished blade. As time passed, Oda Nobunaga, who had become Japan's most powerful lord, was betrayed and killed by one of his chief generals during the Honnoji incident. The sword he possessed at that time of his death was this very one. Witness to the end of Great Samurai, this sword is now designated as an important cultural property and is housed in the Kyoto National Museum.
When you think of Japanese samurai, what image comes to mind? Probably one wearing traditional Japanese attire and carrying a sword. In fact, samurai typically wore 2 Japanese swords at their waist. Of these 2, the longer sword is called a katana, the standard sword, and the shorter one is known as a wakizashi. Samurai use these 2 swords differently, fighting on the battlefield with them. As a rule, a wakizashi refers to a Japanese sword with a blade's length of about 11.8 inches or more, but less than 23.6 inches. In contrast, a standard sword is longer, generally between about 27.6 inches to 31.5 inches. Broadly speaking, if the blade is shorter than 23.6 inches, it is considered a wakizashi. If longer, it is considered a primary sword. Many famous swords, known as masterpieces, were wakizashis, and they were very commonly used in Japan at that time. Renowned swordsmen who practiced 2-sword fencing, like Miyamoto Musashi, and the leader of the Shinsengumi Kondo Isami, are known to have favored longer wakizashis called o-wakizashi. Another difference between the katana and wakizashi lies in the curvature of the blade. Katanas, having longer blades, feature a greater curve. The greater the curve, the higher the killing power, so it is believed that the wakizashi, being shorter and more convenient to use, had less killing power. Similarly, there exists a Tanto, which, like the wakizashi, has a short blade length, but does not have a guard, and is even smaller, with lengths less than 11.8 inches. Thus, there were various types of Japanese swords. Wakizashis began to appear in history around the 16th century. In 1552, records indicate that Oda Nobunaga, the greatest warlord in Japan at the time, wore a Tachi and a wakizashi during his father's funeral and when meeting with the father of his official wife. A Tachi refers to a sword that is even longer than the standard katana. Thus, it is evident that carrying 2 swords simultaneously was practiced at this time. The wakizashi became significantly popular during the Edo period. The reason for its popularity was the enactment of the Bukkei Shohatto, warrior house laws. These laws were established by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who unified Japan and held power at the time, dictating the rules that samurai and nobles were expected to follow. According to these laws, samurai were required to carry 1 katana and 1 wakizashi as a sidearm, which was considered formal attire. Prior to the Edo period, wakizashis used different mountings compared to the simultaneously carried katana. However, once the practice of wearing both swords became mandated, matching the handle and scabbard materials and colors of both swords became common, resulting in a more aesthetically pleasing appearance. What were the uses of the wakizashi? Primarily, the wakizashi served as a backup for the katana when it was damaged or unusable. In battle, it was common for the main weapon to break, so swordsmanship techniques using the wakizashi were developed and practiced. Schools that practiced the two-sword fighting style, like that of the famous swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, included techniques such as throwing the wakizashi from a distance as a secret move, allowing the swordsman to close in on the opponent and strike with the katana while the opponent was distracted. Besides serving as a backup, the wakizashi's shorter length made it more convenient to use in confined spaces such as indoors, in towns, or in forests. Additionally, samurai protocol dictated that when entering a building, one was to remove their katana or tachi and place it on a rack or entrust it to someone, but the wakizashi could remain worn at the waist. When seated, the katana would not be immediately accessible, being either removed or placed beside or behind the seated individual, making the wakizashi the preferred weapon for responding to sudden attacks. Records show that in ceremonial contexts, although samurai were required to remove their katanas, they were expected to defend their lord with just the wakizashi if an incident occurred. It is known that they practiced in formal attire with the wakizashi and long hakama, indicating its use as a primary weapon outside the battlefield. The wearing of the wakizashi was prohibited only in a few restricted settings, such as in the presence of the shogun. Additionally, some roles of the wakizashi outside the battlefield reflect the harsh class system of Japan at the time. In historical Japan, there was a clear distinction between the samurai and peasant classes. There existed a policy known as kiri sute gomen, which allowed a samurai to legally strike down anyone of a lower class who showed disrespect. Under this system, it is said that a samurai would use his katana for the act, offering his wakizashi to the opponent to allow for a semblance of a fair fight before striking. However, in reality, instances where a peasant managed to counterattack or even seize the wakizashi, subsequently boasting in town about defeating a samurai, could lead to severe repercussions for the samurai, such as a loss of status or confiscation of property and possessions. Therefore, actual cases of kiri sute gomen were extremely rare. While we've discussed the role of the wakizashi for samurai, it's important to note that during the same period, wakizashis also played a significant role as weapons for non-samurai classes such as peasants. During the reign of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the ruler before Tokugawa Ieyasu, Hideyoshi feared uprisings by peasants and consequently confiscated all weapons from non-samurai classes, clearly delineating the social classes between samurai and non-samurai. This left peasants frequently subject to the whims of unreasonable samurai or gangsters without means of defense. The ban effectively ended peasant revolts, but also left them defenseless. However, under Tokugawa Ieyasu's rule, the wakizashi was classified as a supplementary weapon to the katana, not a katana itself, allowing non-samurai classes to carry wakizashis. This permission came quickly, and they began carrying wakizashis under the guise of self-defense. Without power, the common folk found the wakizashi an effective tool for protection. The wakizashi, being shorter and lighter, was easier to handle, even for those not skilled in swordsmanship, offering a significant advantage. Additionally, many samurai became nonin, masterless samurai, due to their serving clan being dissolved or other reasons. Among the nonin, it became common practice to wear only a katana, a style known as one-sword wear. Among the many famous swords recognized today, one notable wakizashi is Namazuo Toshiro. This sword was crafted by a master short sword maker, Awataguchi Yoshimitsu, who was active around the 13th century in what is now Kyoto Prefecture. Originally, this blade was a naginata, but it was shortened through polishing, transforming it into a wakizashi. The name Namazuo Toshiro comes from the rounded shape of the blade's tip, which resembles the tail of a catfish, namazu. Initially, this sword was in the possession of Oda Nobunaga's second son, and later passed into the hands of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. However, it was believed to have been destroyed in the fire that consumed Osaka Castle during the siege of Osaka summer campaign, a battle in which Tokugawa Ieyasu vanquished the Toyotomi clan. After the war, Ieyasu lamented the loss of the sword with the castle. Moved by this, he ordered his swordsmith to recreate the sword, thus giving it a new life. This wakizashi, which passed through the hands of several rulers, is currently housed in the Tokugawa Art Museum in Aichi Prefecture. In this video, we will explain what a Tanto is, one of the types of swords used by samurai. We will look at its definition, history, and the role it played on the battlefield. There are several types of Japanese swords, but what exactly is a Tanto? A Tanto is an extremely short sword with a blade length of about 12 inches or less. Unlike other Japanese swords, Tanto usually have little to no curvature. Additionally, the blade is flat, without a ridge line, resembling the shape of a kitchen knife. This flat construction makes the edge sharper, enhancing its cutting ability. The most distinctive feature of a Tanto is the absence of a guard. Due to its size, it is often mistaken for a wakizashi, another short blade, but the lack of a guard distinguishes a Tanto. So when did the Tanto first appear in history, and what was it used for? The exact period when the Tanto emerged is not known, but short-bladed swords have been used in Japan since ancient times. Around the 10th century, when katana began to take shape, Tanto also started to be crafted. Early Tanto had no curvature, and their blades were narrow, making them less suitable for combat. The Kamakura period marked the significant production of Tanto. This era is considered the golden age of katana, with the emergence of samurai across the country. During this time, the Tachi underwent significant evolution to become more practical, and Tanto followed suit. The blades became wider, and a slight curvature was added to the tip, making them more practical and sharper. Many renowned swordsmiths specializing in Tanto appeared during this period, and many Tanto designated as national treasures today were crafted at this time. The Tanto was primarily used on the battlefield. During the Sengoku period, Japanese battles typically started with archers and stone throwers, progressing to spears and swords as combatants closed the distance. The extremely short blade of the Tanto made it the weapon of choice after all other weapons were exhausted, used in close combat grappling with the enemy. Specifically, it was used to stab opponents through the gaps in their armor during hand-to-hand combat. It was also used to sever the heads of fallen enemies. Another significant use of the Tanto was for seppuku, the ritual suicide by disembowelment practiced by samurai. The short, flat blade of the Tanto was ideal for this purpose. After the Sengoku period ended, and wars became less frequent, the Tanto was no longer used in combat. However, it found a new role in the Edo period from the 17th century onwards. Women from samurai families began to carry Tanto for self-defense. The shorter blade was easier for women to handle compared to a full-length sword, and the lack of a guard made it easier to conceal in their clothing. Women carried Tanto not only to protect themselves, but also to maintain their honor by committing suicide if necessary. This self-defense Tanto was called Futokoro Katana, literally meaning pocket sword. To make it easier to carry, the Futokoro Katana was typically minimally decorated with features such as no wrapping on the hilt and no guard, designed for ease of concealment. So far, we have talked about the history of the Tanto, but there are also several types of Tanto. The Yoroi Doshi is a type of Tanto specifically designed for stabbing enemies through the gaps in their armor during close combat on the battlefield. This Tanto features a narrower blade and an extremely thick spine with a thinner tip, making it exceptionally sturdy. The blade length is typically about 11 inches or less, roughly the length of the forearm, as it is often held in a reverse grip with the right hand during grappling. Additionally, the Yoroi Doshi was worn differently from other swords to prevent it from being easily grabbed by the enemy during a struggle. The handle was positioned towards the back, and the scabbard's tip pointed forward. In addition to its primary function, it was also used as a foothold by inserting it into the gaps in stone walls when attacking castles. Next is the Mamorigatana, a protective Tanto. In samurai society, it was customary to gift a Mamorigatana to newborn children as a talisman to protect them from evil spirits and demons. Since ancient times, Japanese swords were believed to house spirits, and they were often used as talismans to protect their owners from illness and disaster. During the Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate presented a Mamorigatana during childbirth in the shogun's household. Even lower-ranking samurai families would give toy Tanto with bells in bags as gifts. This custom continues today. In the imperial household, there is a ceremony called Shiken no Gi, where a Mamorigatana is presented by the emperor to a newborn royal family member on the day of birth or the following day. The Tanto is placed in a white scabbard and positioned next to the newborn's pillow. In traditional Japanese weddings, the bride wears a Tanto tucked into her sash. This practice harks back to the days when samurai daughters carried Tanto for self-defense. Today, it remains an essential part of the bridal outfit. The Mamorigatana is used not only for celebrations, but also for mourning the deceased, placed by the pillow or chest of the departed. This is done to protect the dead from evil spirits and impurities, and to ensure a safe journey in the afterlife. This tradition continues in modern funerals, where the Tanto or other sharp objects like scissors or kitchen knives used by the deceased are placed with them. Lastly, let's introduce a famous Tanto, Atsu Toshiro, a Tanto designated as a national treasure of Japan. This sword was crafted by Toshiro Yoshimitsu, one of the Tenga Sansaku, the three greatest swordsmiths in Japanese history, during the 13th to 14th centuries. It later became the treasured sword of the 9th shogun Ashikaga Yoshihisa and was passed down among many notable samurai. It is said that this Tanto was used in the seppuku of a certain samurai during its journey. The most distinctive feature of this sword is its thickness. The name Atsu Toshiro comes from its significantly thicker blade at the base compared to other swords. It is classified as a Yoroi Doshi, designed to pierce through the gaps in armor. The blade length is approximately 8.6 inches, with a base width of about 0.75 inches. Despite being very small among Tanto, it boasts a remarkable thickness of about 0.47 inches. Considering that the typical thickness of swords is around 0.24 inches, this makes it exceptionally thick and sturdy. Additionally, the blade's hamon, temper line, is of outstanding quality, making it highly valued as a work of art. This Tanto is currently housed in the Tokyo National Museum.
In this video, we'll explore the Naginata, a weapon that played a central role on Japanese battlefields for many centuries. I'll cover its origins using combat and its historical significance as a weapon wielded by women. The Naginata is a weapon characterized by a wide, curved blade affixed to a long shaft. Compared to a katana, the Naginata's blade is wider towards the tip and more pronouncedly curved. Despite its weight, it delivered formidable offensive power. Serving the dual purpose of a sword, spear, and staff, the highly aggressive Naginata was a primary weapon on Japanese battlefields from the 20th to the 15th century. The blade length of a Naginata varied over time and by type, ranging from about 16 to 24 inches to as long as 60 inches. Including the shaft, the total length could be as short as 3.3 feet or exceed 10.8 feet. Similar to a spear, the Naginata was designed primarily for cutting. The shaft's oval cross-section ensured a firm grip when swung. At the lower end of the shaft, like a spear, it was equipped with a metal component known as an ishizuki. This not only served to anchor the Naginata, but also allowed the wielder to thrust or strike opponents with it. The Naginata, a long-standing main weapon on Japanese battlefields, has a history that dates back to the Heian period. During that time, the primary weapons of Japanese warfare were bows and pikes, with the bow playing a particularly prominent role. Battles initially commenced with mounted samurai exchanging arrows, gradually closing distance until the combat shifted to melee weapons as arrows were depleted. While high-ranking mounted samurai predominantly used bows and tachi, pikes were primarily wielded by lower-ranking infantry. Over time, these pikes evolved, leading to the development of the Naginata. It's believed that the teboko, a type of pike with a slightly curved blade, was a precursor to the Naginata. This transformation occurred around the mid-Heian period. Another theory suggests that Nodachi, a large katana, might also have been a precursor to the Naginata. However, the exact origins are unclear. By the late Heian period in the 20th century, the Naginata began appearing frequently in battle scrolls. It subsequently became a principal weapon during and after the Kamakura period. On the battlefields of the Kamakura period, the Naginata was extensively used by infantry who supported the elite archer cavalry. At this time, the primary combatants were still archers. During this era, Naginatas typically had a blade length of about 27.6 inches and an overall length of less than 6.6 feet. By the 14th century, as Japan faced invasions from the Mongol forces, the style of warfare transitioned to group combat on foot. During this period, even elite samurai and cavalry began to wield the Naginata. This era saw the introduction of the O-Naginata, a larger variant of the Naginata, with blade lengths exceeding 59 inches and overall length surpassing 9.8 feet. These larger Naginatas displayed tremendous power on the battlefield. The weight and size of the Naginata required skill to master. It was not only used for slashing but also for thrusting and striking with the shaft, making it highly effective in battle. Its size was particularly useful for sweeping cuts that could mow down enemies in a spectacular fashion, a frequent depiction in battle scrolls. Moreover, it proved very effective in dismounting cavalry. Infantry following friendly cavalry could sweep at the legs of enemy mounts, disabling the horses and unseating their riders. Despite its prolonged utility, by the 15th and 16th centuries, as warfare increasingly involved close quarters infantry battles, the use of Naginata declined and it was gradually replaced by spears. The necessity to swing the Naginata made it less suitable for crowded melee where it could potentially harm allies, making spears a more appropriate choice for the tactics of the time. During the Edo period, the primary pole weapon used by samurai became the spear, and the Naginata saw less frequent use. However, the Naginata still had a role to play. As its use in battle declined, it became a popular weapon for self-defense among women. The Naginata became a skill taught to daughters in samurai families, and samurai women spent much of their time practicing with it. While spears and katana required significant strength to handle, making them challenging for women, the Naginata could be effectively wielded using gravity and centrifugal force. This allowed skilled women to handle it comfortably, contributing to its popularity among them. The Naginata's role as a martial art for self-defense continued to evolve, and it became a budo similar to kendo, boasting a large number of practitioners even today. Let me introduce you the most famous Naginata. The Naginata named Iwatoshi is said to have belonged to the warrior monk Musashibo Benkei, who flourished in the 20th century in Japan. Benkei was a legendary figure in Japanese history, serving the right-hand man to the hero Minamoto no Yoshitsune. He is known for his tale of protecting Yoshitsune during an ambush orchestrated by the shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo, where he was struck by arrows and died standing. The name Iwatoshi suggests a blade sharp enough to cut through stone. While typical Naginata blades of the time were about 27.6 inches long, Iwatoshi's blade was about 41.7 inches long, befitting the strongest warrior monk who was a formidable man in stature. At the Oyamazumi Shrine in Ehime Prefecture, a Naginata that he reportedly donated is preserved. Whether this is the actual Iwatoshi is still uncertain, but this Naginata has been designated as an important cultural property in Japan. The treasure hall of Oyamazumi Shrine houses not only Iwatoshi, but also the Naginata of Tomoe Gozen, known as the most famous female warrior. It is considered one of Japan's foremost historical museums.
In Japan, the spear has long been a primary weapon on the battlefield. Additionally, since spears were crafted by swordsmiths, various spears were made by renowned swordsmiths who crafted famous swords. In this video, we will explore the history of Japanese spears, their use on the battlefield, and the wide range of spear types. The spear is one of the oldest stabbing weapons used worldwide since ancient times, characterized by a blade attached to the end of a long handle, especially noted for its stabbing efficiency. In Japan, the spear is referred to as Yari and became the principal weapon on the battlefield during the 16th century, a time of fierce warfare, surpassing other weapons like swords. In terms of size, Japanese spear blades range from about 7.9 inches in length for shorter ones to over 23.6 inches for longer ones. Including the handle, spears can range from about 6.6 feet to as much as 26.2 feet in length, varying by type. The basic structure of a spear includes the blade at the top, followed by the handle. The part of the handle near the blade, known as Tachi Uchi, is designed to receive strikes from an opponent's sword. Below this is a feature known as chidome, which prevents blood from flowing down to the grip. The rest of the length forms the handle that is held. At the lower end of the handle is a metal part called the ishizuki. This is the part that touches the ground when the spear is held upright. Not only did it serve to stabilize the spear, but it could also be used to thrust or strike an opponent. Therefore, it was made very robust and often had a sharp point. There are several types of cross-sections for the blades of spears. The most standard is the triangular cross-section, which is specialized for piercing. Other types include a diamond-shaped cross-section with double edges, and some that have the same cross-section as a sword with a single edge, allowing not only for stabbing, but also for slashing an opponent. More details on the types of spears and their handling will be discussed later. The history of the spear is extremely ancient in Japan, with its usage dating back to before the Common Era. Initially, these were stone spears, primarily used for hunting animals and also as religious talismans. Stone spears were used for a long period, similar to stone clubs and axes. But around the 3rd century, as bronze technology was introduced from China, along with pikes, stone spears were quickly replaced and disappeared from use. Afterwards, pikes became widespread and played a major role in combat. These were weapons intended for thrusting at enemies, becoming the oldest form of polearm in Japan. The blade sections of these pikes were often diamond-shaped and resembled swords in their form. They were generally held with one hand, a method arising from a combat style where the other hand held a shield. As time progressed, the design of the pike evolved. During the Heian period, pike blades became longer and gradually changed shape, leading to the development of the Naginata. The Naginata later became one of the most iconic weapons in Japan, serving as a highly aggressive weapon that combined features of both swords and spears. With the introduction of the Naginata, traditional pikes fell out of use in combat and were only occasionally used for ceremonial purposes. Though early pikes closely resembled what is known today as the spear, their presence faded with the emergence of the Naginata. So, when exactly did the spear as we know it appear? In the 14th century, what is considered one of the earliest forms of the spear appeared here. This was the Kikuchi Yari, characterized by a short blade of about 8 inches, attached to a long handle, extending the overall length to around 98 inches. Despite the short blade, it boasted significant power and is regarded as a precursor to the well-known spears of today. There are theories suggesting that the spear was introduced from China or evolved from pikes, but the exact origins remain unclear. Following the introduction of the Kikuchi Yari, spears became more prevalent. During this period, Japan saw significant changes in the methods of warfare, with a heavy reliance on lower-ranked soldiers and mass combat on foot becoming the norm. Additionally, the ease of mass-producing spears made them highly popular among lower-ranked soldiers. Between the 14th and 16th centuries, the spear reached its peak and became a principal weapon in battles. Various types of spears emerged, among which the Suyari was a basic model featuring a straight blade without branches and a sleek, straight handle, resembling a clean, rod-like spear overall. Throughout the tumultuous 16th century, as battles raged across Japan, feudal lords recognized the importance of group tactics in warfare, with the spear playing a critical role. The Hojo clan extended their spears from about 14.8 feet to about 17.7 feet by 1582. Similarly, Oda Nobunaga, in 1553, armed 50 of his retainers with spears approximately 20.7 feet long. At that time, spears of such lengths, 17 to 20 feet, were commonly used in battles, underscoring their prominence in the tactics of Japanese warfare. On the battlefield, long spears were primarily used by lower-ranked soldiers in group tactics. A formation known as Yaribusuma involved these soldiers lining up side by side, with the spearheads stuck into the ground to fix the spears in place. This setup allowed them to counterattack against incoming enemy cavalry by injuring the horses and dismounting the riders. The soldiers could then deliver the finishing blows with katana. Another method involved soldiers simultaneously swinging their spears vertically downward to crush enemies from above. The force generated by flexing the long spears to strike at enemies, such as on their heads, was tremendous, said to deliver several times the impact of thrusting attacks. The technique of striking downward with spears, requiring less skill than precisely thrusting at an opponent, was actively employed. Thus, spears were not only used for stabbing, but also for striking, making them effective even when long and cumbersome to handle. While we've primarily discussed lower-ranked soldiers so far, it's important to note that spears were not limited to them. Almost all warriors, including higher-ranking samurai, carried spears. Samurai of the upper ranks, who were skilled in spear techniques and had the economic means, typically used sophisticated and challenging spears, such as the Jumonji Yari. Generally, lower-ranked soldiers wielded mass-produced spears, longer than about 13.1 feet, while samurai and cavalry used shorter, high-quality spears. As the Sengoku period ended and the Edo period began, the spear evolved into a symbol of a samurai's status. Official outings by the warrior class invariably included retainers carrying spears, a demonstration of power. Similarly, just as swordsmanship was popular, so too was spear technique, with many samurai refining their skills with the spear. There are various types of spears, but let's introduce some representative ones. Suyari is the most basic form of spear. Its blade is straight, and the shaft is simple and rod-like. Within this category, those with longer shafts are called Nagaya Yari, with blade lengths ranging from 3.5 to 5.9 inches, and an overall length of about 13.1 to 19.7 feet. This type of spear was commonly used by lower-ranked soldiers in group battles. Another type within the Suyari category is the Omiyari, which features a longer blade of 23.6 to 27.6 inches or more, and an overall length of 6.6 to 9.8 feet. Due to the longer blade, it weighs over 11 pounds. The most famous spear, known as Nihongo, is one of this type. Jumonji Yari features a cross-shaped blade. Apart from its primary thrusting function, the branches of the Jumonji Yari can inflict damage even if the main thrust is parried, and they can also be used to hook and trip an opponent. There are several variations of this design, all of which are challenging to master and, importantly, considered luxurious, making them favored weapons of high-ranking samurai. Even in ukiyo-e paintings from hundreds of years ago, it is common to see daimyo and other high-ranking warriors holding Jumonji Yari.
The bow and arrows have been used as weapons worldwide since ancient times. There are various sizes and types, including large and small ones, as well as crossbows. The bows used on Japanese battlefields are referred to as Yumi. While I will discuss the history of Japanese bows later, what are their distinctive features? The most notable characteristics of the Japanese bow is its length. While Western bows have a total length of about 63 inches, standard Japanese bows are about 87 inches long, making them the longest in the world. This length far exceeds the height of the user. Due to this length, arrows shot from the bow delivered tremendous force, with a maximum range exceeding 437 yards. Because of their considerable length, Japanese bows were not gripped at the center, but rather slightly lower, around 2/3 of the way up from the bottom. Given their length and considerable weight, handling them was very challenging, and mastering their use required extensive training. Additionally, there are structural differences in the construction of the bow. While Western bows have separate parts such as the handle and limbs, the Japanese Yumi is a single, continuous piece from the bottom to the top. It is unclear exactly when the bow and arrow began to be used in Japan, but it is known that they have been in use for several thousand years. Excavations have uncovered bows and arrows that appear date back to ancient times, and back then arrowheads were made of stone. Around the 3rd century BCE, iron and bronze were introduced from the continent, leading to a rapid evolution of the bow and arrow. Copper and iron were used for arrowheads, significantly increasing their effectiveness. From this period onward, bows and arrows were used not only for hunting but also in warfare. At that time, both short bows, which were less than 63 inches long, and longer bows were used. During the Kofun period, which lasted from the 3rd to the 7th century, bows became longer. Long bows with a total length of around 79 inches became the standard. Bows this length were primarily used by infantry, while shorter bows were used by cavalry. It is worth noting that the bows of this time had a simple structure, made by carving natural wood into a round shape. The evolution of the bow in Japan continued, and by the mid-Heian period, the composite bow emerged. Until then, bow had been made from a single material, but the new design involved laminating bamboo on the outside of wooden core, resulting in increased power. During this era, the samurai appeared in Japan, and the style of combat shifted from foot soldiers to one centered around mounted archery. The bow became the primary weapon on the battlefield. Many illustrated scrolls depicting battles from this period show samurai on horseback, wielding bows. The emergence of the samurai also led to significant advancement in Japanese archery techniques. Archery was divided into two main styles, shooting at close-range targets from horseback and shooting at long-range targets on foot. The former, mounted archery, was particularly emphasized. Since mounted archers had to accurately hit targets while riding on horseback, it required a high level of skill. Only elite samurai rode horses at that time, and they honed their archery skills daily in preparation for battles. At the time, the bow was considered a symbol of the samurai's weapon. Proficiency in archery was a source of pride for the samurai. They would often inscribe their names on their arrows to ensure their deeds were known if they defeated an enemy. This background led to the rise of many renowned archers. Nasuno Yoichi, who served under the shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo, and Fujiwara no Hidesato, a legendary founding figure among samurai, are famous for their exceptional archery skills and are still talked about today. Entering the Kamakura period, bows and arrows were made even longer to increase their power as weapons. The length of bows reached up to about 87 inches, and some were reportedly over 118 inches long. At that time, battles in Japan followed a specific sequence. When both armies faced each other, the commanders would first announce their names to each other. Next, both sides would shoot whistling arrows high into the sky as a signal to commence battle. Then, a phase called Yaikusa, where mounted warriors engaged in archery combat, would begin. After shooting all their arrows, the battle would transition into close combat, with infantry wielding melee weapons joining the fray. Thus, battles fought with bows often determined the outcome of conflicts. Afterward, Japan experienced invasions by Mongol forces, leading to a gradual shift from battles dominated by cavalry to those centered on infantry-based mass combat. In the 15th century, Japan entered the Sengoku period, a time of widespread conflict among samurai throughout the country. During this era, the bow continued to play a vital role as a primary weapon. With the shift towards large-scale infantry-based group battles, organized archery units would line up in dense formation and fire volleys of arrows at enemy forces. It is said that the aim was not so much to target individual enemies accurately, but rather to impede the enemy army's advance. In the mid-16th century, During the peak of samurai warfare, Portuguese traders introduced matchlock guns to Japan. The samurai were astonished by the power of these firearms, and renowned warlords like Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu eagerly incorporated them into their armies. As matchlock guns began to be mass-produced, the bow gradually ceased to be the primary weapon of war. The bows not used on the battlefield were studied by the samurai of peaceful eras as a martial art, eventually establishing Kyudo. Today, like Kendo and Judo, Kyudo is widely practiced across Japan, with over 100,000 competitors nationwide. High school students make up half of these competitors, and in Aichi Prefecture, half of the high school have Kyudo clubs. These students compete in Kyudo skills all over Japan every day. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, giving a like, and leaving plenty of comments. Until next time, sayonara.